Sorry.
And this is a 3-minute timer, so we...
Good evening. My name is Chris Winter. I live at 3611 Stony Point Road. I have been drawn to the debate on marijuana tolerance in our community because of my personal experience on both sides of this issue. I am currently writing a book on the subject using my own knowledge gained over the past 21 years of healing from cannabis addiction. Proponents of marijuana legalization, or in this case passive and weak attitudes towards enforcement, have my empathy due to my active addiction to pot for over 17 years before 1991. Though today I resolutely stand with the opponents of marijuana legalization because my life without cannabis has been affirmed and greatly improved over these past 21 years of total abstinence from all drugs. I wish to stress your obligation as elected civic leaders charged with promoting the common good, that to pass this unwise and absurd resolution would certainly confuse and obscure the need for us to stand firm against all influences that threaten our families and our civility in general. In my opinion, now is one of those times to stand. From my own experience, I can say with conviction and honor that casual use of cannabis is an obfuscation of the real and insidious threat to all children. The hardest hit by this drug disabling addiction.
Please respect other
treat
people's
speakers
time.
with respect. Yes.
Yes.
Please treat our speakers with respect, and they'll treat you with the same.
Just stop the timer if you don't mind. Thank you. I'm going to try to find out where I'm at here. The hardest hit by this disabling drug addiction are the children of at-risk households. My background and upbringing fall into this latter category. I immediately became an addict to pot when I found out how well it helped me run from the pain of my childhood. I was 12 years old. Do you, as leaders of our community, wish to enable destructive and misleading behavior that will most certainly derail the future of our young and old people as my life was derailed? From my own life experience with cannabis and without cannabis, I can assure you, as few others can, you will promote and foster more misery and degradation in the lives of at-risk families if you vote yes for this deceit. My path in life was one of deceit and misery until I accepted my addiction to marijuana. Through literally years of self-realization, acceptance, and much prayer, I gratefully and humbly admitted the harm I caused my life and the lives of others around me. This self-realization and interchange could never have taken place while getting high. I have found the cycle of addiction is too powerful to permit a life based in rigorous honesty, which is one of the 3 traits needed to overcome addiction, the other 2 being open-mindedness and willingness. Living life on adult terms was impossible for me as I ran from mature responsibility through daily pot use. I emphasize these points to you because the proponents seek to minimize the causes and effects of marijuana addiction for their own selfish purposes. I know this because I was one of them myself. I was never interested in my community's good, only in my own want to get and stay high. I did not know or care how destructive my behavior was to my family and our free, civil, constitutional republic.
Thank you very much. Rob Turman.
Thank you all for this opportunity. To say that this drug, pot, is harmless and non-addictive is a sure sign of the self-centered deception I once lived. I behaved the very same way and said the same things when confronted with my drug problem by family members and loved ones. Denial is a common trait to all addicts, as it is rooted in the self-deception that I lived with on a daily basis. Lying to myself that I had no problem at all smoking pot as my life fell apart over and over. When I finally stopped lying to myself on February 10, 1991, I was able to receive the help I needed to heal from my addiction. If you promote this deception on our community, you will be joining and promoting the misery I once courted to the depth of utter despair. The pain and complications of my childhood stayed with me and were magnified as long as I had pot to run from negative realities that held me back. Only when its negative influence was totally removed could I heal and pursue true happiness and joy. I tell all of you on this council with truth on my side, this despair I talk of did not come from any other drug other than pot. When I first stopped getting high, I began to do the right things because I had to in order to heal. Now I do the right things because I want to. In order to live in a free society that hates tyranny, I have to care about my liberty and the liberty of my fellow citizens. In order to do this, we are instructed to basically be good people, be educated, and be involved in government. None of these traits were on my Christmas list when I was an addict. I wanted better connections, better drugs, and more money to buy drugs with. That was it. No concern for my fellow man or my form of government. None of it entered into my efforts at living. Alexis de Tocqueville warned us about tyrants usurping our freedoms by dulling our sensibilities for liberty, our aspirations toward goodness, our concern for the public good, and most of all, our civic duties founded in a strong sense of individual sovereignty. His writing on this subject of our democracy are still considered genius in political science 200 years after his groundbreaking book, Democracy in America. My take on this topic from his perspective is that loss of freedoms would be accomplished through social tolerance of behavior detrimental to morality and virtue. He understood the social and political degradation to our constitutional republic if the people were to become self-centered and self-serving. This is an accurate and precise description of me when I use pot on a daily basis to run from the negative aspects of my upbringing. My message to all on this council is clear. If you want our public to gradually and insidiously surrender their desire for personal sovereignty and interest in self-government, then by all means pass this deception you call a resolution. But if you wish to buttress our republic with the kind of human traits it is starved for, such as self-honesty, trust, courage, then send this resolution and those that support it packing. From my unique perspective, I consider this resolution an absurdity in the context of living in a free republic due to its threat to our families and our community.
Your time is finished. Anna Freshwater.
Good evening. Thank you, council people. Can you hear me? To be as strong as people with freedom, we have to remove...
Can you say your name and where you live?
Oh, sorry, Anna
Thanks.
Freshwater, Freshwater. To be as strong as people as freedom, we have to remove obstacles which inhibit human potential. I see the desire on our council when you support local youth programs in Charlottesville. How can you offer one hand in support of youth while literally backhanding them with this absurd suggestion? Only when I stopped the active addiction to marijuana did I ever succeed in any endeavor in my life. Pot steals away initiative, self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-worth. How, you ask? Through self-centeredness and self-deception. I could never allow myself to do good things or reach for my best abilities while I was aware on a deep level that I was lying to myself. My self-centeredness consistently kept me from reaching out to anyone. No, to pass this resolution would to be a mark of shame on the history of Charlottesville. From a recovering drug addict, fortunate enough to stand here, free of this drug, and who wishes no one to fall into the trap of addiction, think of Charlottesville and not of yourselves. In the countries of Europe that have legalized marijuana, the age of first use has been declining steadily. This can be expected in our community. So is it acceptable to you that 6- and 7-year-olds be soon using pot for the first time? At this time, I wish to share research from the Council from Europe. This behavioral science gives insight into the evidence that marijuana legalization, or even lax attitudes towards the same, correlates to early first use among children. I quote, "In conclusion, I stress my identification with drug addicts in our community and hope that they find the freedom and peace associated with overcoming as many complications of addiction as possible. While you, as a governing body, consider closely your duty to protect and to promote the public good, I may suggest to you focus your efforts on drug prevention, enforcement of state and federal drug laws, and above all, encourage drug addicts to stop using drugs. Please do not abandon them with such naive and destructive resolution. As a father and grateful member of a society, I humbly demand that you support our police department in sending a mature, caring, responsible message to our community. Illegal drug use, whether casual or habitual, is not a positive influence in Charlottesville. As a community, we ought to come together and eradicate addiction of pot, and we should never enable addicts as supporters of this resolution promotes."
Thank you. Connie Penn from Cedar Grove Road.
My name is Connie Perrin. I'm in Ruckersville, Virginia. And I have some studies that were done on the use of marijuana. There's a pediatric study that suggests that legal sanctions may influence the initial decision to use drugs, and that this influence diminishes as drug use by individuals progresses. I'd like to repeat that. The study suggests that legal sanctions may influence the initial decision to use drugs, and that this influence diminishes any drug use by individuals as drug use by individuals progresses. If so, it's the youngest adolescents, those who have not yet tried marijuana or are in the experimentation phase, who would be affected most by changes in marijuana laws. Age at first use is in turn a risk factor for problem use in the future. Parental use of marijuana in the last year is associated with their adolescence use during the same period. Some advocates for the legalization of marijuana argue that it is safer than alcohol. They suggest that increased use of marijuana by young people might have a positive effect if some adolescents switched from alcohol to marijuana, a substitution effect. This theory cannot be supported by recent studies on adolescent marijuana and alcohol use that incorporated the price of marijuana into the analysis. These studies conclude that an increase in use of marijuana by adolescents would result in an increased use of alcohol. For example, that the two drugs are economic complements. The most widely scrutinized large-scale change in the legal status of marijuana occurred in the Netherlands. Dutch policy regarding decriminalization is very complex. Use of illegal drugs per se is not punishable by law, but possession for use is. Drug dealing also is considered a felony. Theoretically, one can be imprisoned for up to 1 month for possession of 5 grams or less of cannabis, and promotion of marijuana through advertisements is forbidden also. From 1984 to 1996, the period during which Dutch prosecution of marijuana-related offenses became virtually non-existent, marijuana was increased consistently and substantially until 1992, while decreasing or remaining stable in other countries. Among 18 to 20-year-olds, the proportion who reported ever having used marijuana increased from 15 to 44%, and the proportion who reported using it within the previous 30 days increased from 8.5 to 18.5%. Use among adolescents in the United States decreased steadily from 1979 to 1992. In Norway, which also forbids the sale of marijuana, use remained constant until 1992 and then increased. Use remained steady or decreased in Spain, Stockholm, Hamburg, and Denmark during this period. These figures strongly suggest that marijuana use was influenced by changes in Dutch policy during this period. However, the United States and Norway also experienced increases. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Thorpe.
Park that right there. Good evening, councilors. My name is Carol Thorpe. I reside on Oak Tree Lane, Charlottesville, and I speak this evening on my own behalf. I come to council tonight to ask you to refrain from adopting the resolution regarding marijuana. My reason for addressing you has nothing to do with whether marijuana use is a good or a bad thing, or whether or not it should be legalized. My concern is to ensure that council refrain from using our fine local police department as a tool to promote political agendas that you support or to fight those that you do not. I see no reason for you to issue such a resolution about the enforcement priority of existing marijuana laws, as supported by research done and presented to you by city staff. And I'm referring to the notes that were attached online to your agenda this evening. I presume you've read them. But in summary, your staff determined that in the calendar year 2011 in Charlottesville, possession of marijuana was charged 113 times, connected with a total of 5,040 arrests. By my rough math, that's less than 2.5%. They go on to say it is believed that the great majority of those charges are typically subordinate to another criminal charge, such as the discovery of marijuana would be a result of a search incident to arrest relative to some other primary offense. Within your staff's conclusion, they say, knowing this, meaning the totality of their statement, staff believes it is unnecessary to include a directive from council to deprioritize the enforcement of personal marijuana use. In my personal opinion, your staff is correct. As demonstrated by their own report, Chief Longo is an outstanding police commander and more than capable of prioritizing the amount of attention each criminal act should receive without the interjections of City Council. We have a seasoned professional at the helm of local law enforcement, and I suggest that you let him alone to do his job. So why then would you see a need to adopt such a resolution, except to appease certain members of your constituency in hope of making political gain? I find this situation reminiscent of the disastrous behavior of the previous incarnation of council during the Occupy Charlottesville encampment of Lee Park last October. Among many missteps by council, one was based on what City Manager Maurice Jones called, quote, the will of council, when he issued a directive of non-enforcement to Chief Longo to restrain him from upholding the park curfew and for 2 nights until a permit could be obtained. Whether the majority political orientation of our governing body is Democrat or Republican, progressive or conservative, I see a great danger in that body using the police department in any manner to promote its political agenda or to fight the opposite side. With great respect to this council, I strongly encourage you to keep, to keep this in mind as you conduct your duty to our community. Thank you.
Paul Long.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Naomi Roberts, 1140 St. Clair Avenue Extended. I'm here tonight to speak about marijuana. The papers say that 3 of the 5 of you favor resolution proposed by a drug user, and that's what marijuana is. It's a drug. Anything that alters your mind is a drug, and the decision should be up to the police to use their duty to enforce state and federal law in the city of Charlottesville, not a resolution from council to declare marijuana offenses be the low law enforcement priority in the city. What about driving under influence and the high that this drug gives you? What's there to say if it's a low priority that more youth will not be involved? Charlottesville will become the city of potheads and will bring more drug lords to the city. It is not city council's job to decide on such a social life-altering behavior. This resolution will enable people like those living next door to me and others all over the city to get in on the action, and it will be hard to get police to pay attention to it when we citizens have a complaint, because the police will be diverted elsewhere. In all my years in living in this city, I have never seen such decisions council has approved. I know how it affects the neighborhoods, as I personally have experienced the trafficking next door to me for over a year before they were evicted by their landlord. It was hard for the police to get anything on them because they require pictures of people coming and going, and it made our life hell. There were as many as 65 different vehicles frequenting that place, not just once, but over and over. And it had gotten to the point where we neighbors were afraid to go out after dark. I also have had suspicious activity all last year when some ruling relatives moved back in with their relatives and cars coming and going all hours, both night and day. And this is a property owner, incidentally. This is not a matter for city council. It's a police matter. There are other things council needs to be taken care of rather than pacifying those that do not want to abide by the law. Thank you very much.
Barbara Cruikshank.
Hello, my name is Lena Marie. I live at 808 Alta Vista Avenue in the city of Charlottesville. I'm here to talk about the marijuana resolution. I want to say that I was a cigarette smoker for 20 years. It took me 8 years to quit, and I know what an addiction is. I have health problems, and I have had doctors prescribe addictive medications to me without bothering to tell me about it. So I'm familiar with what an addiction is, and through legal substances. And I've smoked marijuana on and off for decades. I've gone years without smoking. I go months without smoking. It's not an addictive drug. That said, I'd like to talk about the difference between dangerous drugs, not legal or illegal, dangerous drugs. Addictive drugs are dangerous. Highly concentrated drugs are dangerous because they have major side effects associated with them. Those are problems. marijuana does not fit into that category and should not be lumped with those substances. It's unfair, and it sends a message to people that they're. I mean, you want to talk about sending mixed messages or being unclear. That's unclear. When you put dangerous substances in with natural substances that have medicinal effects to them, that's where the confusion comes in. I have friends who have had cancer, and they shouldn't be. Marijuana is used medicinally to treat some of the side effects so that they can eat without becoming sick. And it adds another stress to them to have to deal with whether it's legal or not, who they're getting it from. Are they risking their freedom in order to get a medicine? I think deprioritizing marijuana is an important step in the right direction, especially until we can have medical access for people who honestly need it. Thank you.
Jeff Fogel.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Fogel. I reside at 215 Spruce Street here in the city. The war on drugs has been a massive and colossal failure, something that has not been mentioned by the people here who were opposed to the resolution tonight. It has not only been a failure in terms of its effectiveness in reducing drug use, it has been a devastating impact on the communities that it has harmed, devastating impact on people. Now, the staff has provided you with information on the limited number of people who are charged each year with marijuana possession, but they have failed to provide you with information about the racial breakdown of that. And I wonder why. We certainly should be sensitive to this question at this juncture, that over 50% of the people who are being charged with possession of marijuana are African American, and that's contributing to the racial disparities in our criminal justice system. Now, I'm not here representing the coalition that I have represented before, but what I'm saying is entirely consistent with the proposition that has been put forth by the coalition that drug usage belongs in the public health sector, not in the criminal law sector. And when we look at the message that's being sent today, and has been sent for 40 years, it's a message of hypocrisy as people sit around drinking as they talk about whether or not we should have marijuana laws or not. It is a message of ridiculousness in terms of the amount of money we're spending on this proposition. It is an outrage that people are dying on the streets, not only of America, but of Mexico and elsewhere in Latin America and Central America, only because we have laws against marijuana. The laws against marijuana, like the laws against drugs, create crime. Now, it may be counterintuitive, but I'm here to propose to you that you pass an ordinance prohibiting the possession of marijuana. And I'm here to suggest that to you, and I have a memo that I want to distribute, that the city of Charlottesville can prohibit marijuana in its ordinances and make sure that nobody goes to jail for possession of marijuana. Now, I'm sure you will have Mr. Brown review this, as he should, but I would hope that you would also read it as well. This is not rocket science, it's only the law. And it's not that complicated, and I think people can read this memo and understand it. Obviously, don't expect anybody to take action tonight. It would be premature to do so, but I would encourage you to take a look at this. And it essentially says that Charlottesville can pass an ordinance prohibiting the possession of marijuana as the state statute, but providing that it be a Class 4 misdemeanor, which would not allow a jail sentence to be imposed. I've heard a lot of people talk about this question of whether or not drug usage should be decided by the police department. I don't think so. I don't think we elected the police department to make policy or law in our community. And you know what? I'm not sure the police department does either. And let me quote from their 2011 annual report. The community it serves determines the role of the police. That's an accurate statement. And so for the police department to come here and tell you, in any respects, leave us alone, we should make the determination of what should be the policy, it's wrong. And it's hypocritical of them to say that after having put this forward. I don't want to take any more time. Pardon?
Your time is up.
Okay. Thank you.
There you go.
Larry Bishop.
reside in Batesville, although actually I spent a tremendous amount of time in town. How can you follow that? Really, this is not an issue of legalization. The proposal is not about legalization. It is about reprioritizing how we approach this issue. And I think what Jeff has just presented you actually will address that in some very specific ways. So what I would suggest that you do is look at what he has offered, examine it, and perhaps move on with regard to that in terms of an outline about how we might possibly reprioritize how we approach this issue here in our community. And that is well within your latitude as counselors within our community and well within the parameters of state law. Thank you.
Item number 5, deprioritizing of marijuana, beginning with the first of the first reading, and Maurice Jones, City Manager, will give us a background report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have before you a resolution and an alternative resolution pertaining to the use of marijuana and whether to ask the state government to revisit sentencing guidelines that result in jail time for personal use of marijuana, to eliminate the presumption of the intent to distribute marijuana without evidence, and to consider legislation that would decriminalize, legalize, or regulate marijuana. Proponents of the resolution believe that the time has come for careful consideration of these changes, and they believe a significant amount of time, energy, and money is used to arrest and prosecute marijuana users, not only in the state but also here in Charlottesville. And they believe that funding could be better used on other issues in our state and in our city. We'll touch on those issues in just a moment with Chief Longo. You've also heard from members of the public both in favor of and against this resolution, not only in these chambers over the course of the last month or so and this evening, but also via email. You've received a lot of email traffic over the course of the last week or so from folks who are both in favor and against these resolutions that you're considering before you this evening. They've raised concerns. Dr. Lillian Peek of the Health Department sent an email raising concerns about the effect of long-term marijuana use on children and adults. Dave Chapman from the Commonwealth Attorney's Office has raised those concerns as well with you via email. And in favor of the resolution, you've heard from Mr. Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, who spoke in favor of the decriminalization aspect of this, but then also deprioritization. So, as we mentioned before, one of the reasons cited for approving the resolution this evening is the effect that marijuana enforcement has on the police department. There's an assumption that it has a major impact on the police department, and as the statistics demonstrate that we put in the memo for you, statistically speaking, it's a relatively small number of folks who are arrested for possession of marijuana, and Chief Longo is here to talk a little bit about those statistics and some of the other aspects of the law enforcement side of this. So, Chief Longo, can you come forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Brown, good evening. Thank you again for the opportunity to shed some light from a law enforcement perspective on this issue that you have in front of you. Let me say first and foremost, you've heard enough advocacy. I'm not here to advocate a position. I'm here to give you information to help you make a more informed decision. And as Mr. Fogel pointed out, my job is to balance the rule of law with the need to perform a legitimate law enforcement function. And in the midst of that balance is the community's expectation as to how we go about our work. I'm not going to disagree that in many places in this country, a lot of money is spent on the war on drugs. But right now we're talking about one small piece of that, and that's the possession of marijuana. And I gave you some data that I think would more than suggest the fact that we don't expend a lot of time, energy, or resources on enforcement of that law. Now, whether or not that's a conscious decision, it's the reality of the data. Our records management system is old, it's antiquated, and while it cannot tell you specific individual arrests, it can tell you how many charges are placed over a period of time. And in 2011, as the documentation would suggest to you, 5,040 criminal charges were placed. Only 113 of them were for possession of marijuana. And Chief,
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a sense of how many of those were primary versus Secondary.
Just about to get to that.
Okay.
Again, that antiquated records management system that will be replaced in the years to come, I hope, can't tell me that without looking at each individual case. Experience would suggest to me that most of those are likely secondary charges, meaning you're arrested for driving while under the influence or some other primary charge. We search you, incident to arrest, marijuana is discovered, and the marijuana charge is placed. When possession of marijuana is the primary charge, typically it's enforced by citation, not custodial arrest, which means there's no time for the officer to be out of service, there's no time to spend at the complex visiting with the magistrate. They issue the citation, much like they do a traffic citation, and they're on their way. And then the person comes to appear in general district court somewhere down the road, and as Mr. Chapman would say if he were here, and I certainly can't speak for him, the vast majority of those cases don't see jail time. There are other alternatives in this community that people are afforded. Drug court, for example. Tom Von Hemert, our community criminal justice planner, is here to talk about some data to the extent you have questions. Ross Carew from Offender Aid and Restoration is here to talk about their clients that have been exposed to these charges, the marijuana subpopulation. So statistically, I don't think we have an argument here that it's taxing the resources of law enforcement. There's one thing I will bring to your attention, and I'll simply ask you to consider, and I won't only ask you to consider it as a police chief, I'll ask you to consider it as a parent of a 12 and 14-year-old in our school divisions. The Partnership for Drug-Free America published a report that was released just last week. It had some dramatic statistics about the increase in drug use, marijuana use specifically, among young people. The preceding month before this study came out, the numbers went up over 80% over a 3-year period. And I want to read to you very briefly, and then I'll sit down and let others talk, what the president of the partnership had to say about the report. These findings are deeply disturbing, as the increases we're seeing in heavy, regular marijuana use among high school students can spell real trouble for these teens later on. Heavy use of marijuana, particularly beginning in adolescence, brings the risk of serious problems, and our data show it is linked with alcohol and other drugs as well. Kids who begin using drugs or alcohol as teenagers are more likely to struggle with substance use disorders when compared to those who start using after their teenage years. Now, I'm not a subject matter expert in this area, but I am a parent, and I am concerned that this data may in fact speak to the very things the president of the organization speaks to in his comments. So I would ask you to consider that and to talk to others that are more skilled in that area than I am before you make a decision. And so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. As I said, Tom and Ross are here to talk about some of the data that's in the report as well. That is the memo that we provided you with.
Is somebody going to present new data?
Good evening. I'm Tom Von Hemert. I work for you. I work as the criminal justice planner, and I also work as the coordinator for CIT, Crisis Intervention Team. If I can answer any questions in reference to the statistical information that I was able to gather from the different agencies that are within our community, I'd be glad to answer them.
Hi. I do have a quick question. That the National Association of Drug Courts were opposed to decriminalization.
Correct.
Yeah, and do you have any of their rationale for that decision?
I called Region 10, the CSB, which provides the treatment for the drug court clients, and what I listened to from Linda Hamilton, who's the outreach director for substance abuse and mental health, was saying that the clients that are dealing with addictions are probably one of the high risk for reoffense, but it's also one of the issues of what's called amotivational, as in that they would rather deal with other drugs and not dealing with the addiction of marijuana itself. So it's easier sometimes for them to give up the use of other illegal substances or even alcohol, but for the use of marijuana, that's a very hard substance in their history in process to give up compared to any of the other drugs that they're dealing with in their recovery process.
Oh, okay.
I have a question. I got some data from the jail, which is not at all official, and also dealing with the how you track what people are charged with and what they're in jail for. And,
Sure.
But they were looking at people who had marijuana, either possession or possession with an intent to distribute, so larger quantities of possession, as their primary charge. And so presumably there's some likelihood that other charges were lesser charges, which seemed to be one way of getting at it, not so much a statistically significant way, but a reasonable way to look at it.
Sure.
And you know, in kind of a cursory looking over it, found maybe 20, 21 folks in a year from Charlottesville who were actually in jail on these charges.
Correct.
And one of the things that I found particularly disturbing was that of those folks who were in jail, they were 4 times as likely to be African American as white. And so, you know, that really kind of makes me wonder, you know, how is it decided who goes to jail, and how are we enforcing this when we talk about that it's already not a huge sender of people to jail? It seems that when people are sent to jail, there's an incredible racial disparity, way more than the jail population itself. And I just wondered if you have any insight into that.
No, you asked the right question, and I agree with Mr. Fogel. I think that a lot more research has to be done within the data systems. And unfortunately, we work with an antiquated system, and we can't compare one system with the other systems in the criminal justice system. And that's part of my work with evidence-based decision-making model, is to take a look at those issues so we can answer those types of questions. You know, is it a race issue, or is it other complicated factors? Whether it could be poverty, it could be different kinds of drug use that is happening, where it might be cocaine or crack or heroin or meth.
Well, this was all among the people who had marijuana as their primary charge.
Right. So we have to take a look at the total numbers and how it's all combined together. So you're right, but the information or the data to support that one way or the other is not there at this time. Chief Longo, do you want to answer?
The only thing I was going to add, and you are asking the right questions, and as I was alluding to with respect to our records management system, we're in the process of letting an RFP to identify, as the region that is, to identify someone to help craft an RFP to get a new system. And one of the things we're going to be looking to is what are the questions we need to ask of that system? For example, I want to be able to break out primary versus secondary charges. I want to be able to know arrests, not specific, a number of arrests, but not just specific charges. I want to be able to look at race and gender and ethnicity and other factors as well when we pull out data and begin making decisions from that data. So again, the right question is just we're not in a position to be able to answer it with any clarity based on the data that we have. It's just as frustrating to us as it is to you and the rest of the community, particularly on such an important issue such as disproportionate minority representation.
Chief Langer, do you have any other staff member who wishes to speak?
If with your indulgence, I would ask Ross Carew to speak specifically to the issue of recidivism, because part of the conclusions in the memo that staff provided, that there was this data that demonstrated that they reoffended at a higher rate, second only to domestic violence, and I thought that would be information council might find useful in making a decision.
Good evening. Ross Carew, I'm the Assistant Director at OAR. And what typically happens in a possession of marijuana case, the client is given 2 different options when they go to court. They're offered what's called a deferred judgment, in which they have a 6-month suspension of their license. They have to come to our program. They have to go to ASAP for drug education. When they come to our office, they're under supervision, and they have to do urine screens. So the other option is that they be found guilty of the offense, and generally what happens is they're given a 30-day suspended sentence. That's typically what happens. Now, when we looked at data in 2 different ways, we looked at it across the state, which all of our sister agencies, and found that the possession of marijuana caseload was approximately 20% of the statewide caseload. We also did some recidivism work, and we also did some risk assessment work. In looking at the risk assessment work, we determined that folks that have been convicted of or given that deferred judgment of possession of marijuana were second only to domestic violence in terms of risk for general recidivism. We also looked at recidivism here in Charlotte, for OAR, and found that, we looked at our entire population, and then we looked at 3 different subpopulations of ours: domestic violence, underage alcohol, and possession of marijuana. We found that the possession of marijuana population had a reconviction rate after 3 years of 42%, and a 3-year reconviction rate of substance abuse related offenses at 25%. So that's concerning. Question.
Are we talking about somebody who you find a joint? I mean, there's got to be a big spectrum here of people who get caught with marijuana.
Yeah,
And
there's legal legal classifications based on how much you have. If you have over X amount, I'm sure the chief can talk to you about what that X amount is. It can be graduated penalties.
Charges.
Or charges, excuse me, on felony versus misdemeanor. If it's just simple possession, it's a misdemeanor offense.
And those misdemeanor offenses have those 2 choices of guilty or you have to go to drug court? I mean, isn't that kind of...
No, ma'am. They what'll happen is they'll come to our program, OAR, for supervision, probation supervision for a 6-month period of time. They'll also go to ASAP, in which they'll have a drug education class. They'll also get urine screened, and they'll have their driver's license restricted.
Even for a tiny bit of marijuana? Is this what we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am. Any amount.
Any other questions from the gentleman?
And I have a question of Chief Longo. In terms of maybe you have data, maybe you just have experience, and I trust both of them. In terms of sort of street crime, do you see much street crime associated with marijuana?
Well, certainly distribution of any drugs typically results in other criminal behaviors. Sometimes that criminal behavior is violent. Simple possession of marijuana, I don't know that I necessarily have enough data in which to determine whether there's a greater likelihood that that person would be involved in other types of crime. Not so much with possession. And again, it's a small subpopulation of charges that we've... And that 113, by the way, is, if we look back over 5 years, is about the average. Typically don't go much beyond that. I think the highest at one point in time may have been around 130. But they're not huge numbers.
Right. And I think you told us this, and maybe you could repeat it for, since I can't remember, and for the audience. If there's 113, is there a majority just, again, have a small amount that you kind of suspect, or they're just kind of just using themselves?
Without looking at each of those 113 cases specifically, it would be difficult for me to be able to make that determination.
Okay. I think, personally, I think this sort of speaks to one of the problems is that there is a big difference between just having a little recreational cannabis and distributing. I mean, and really, being in the black market of drug distribution, and the penalty seems kind of severe for just a little bit.
Well, I think that would be, those thoughts would be relevant if in fact the discussion was about whether we're decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana, but that's not the discussion before us tonight. It's how much big of a priority should law enforcement place on it, and I think the numbers speak to that.
Right, but I think at the same time, the reason it's come up is that people's lives are really seriously impacted for a very small amount of a drug that a lot of people do imbibe in every once in a while. So I think that's really kind of where we're trying to get to. Not people who are distributing, not people who are driving under the influence, and certainly not talking about children. But I think that actually does speak to one of the issues, is the penalty really, so outweigh what the crime is?
Well, I'm certainly not trying to provide direction to counsel by the following comment, but it sounds to me like some information that you might need to look at and gather before making a decision is information regarding prosecution and sentencing, so that you have a firm idea of just how many of these 113 people are actually going to our regional jail and spending time there. because I don't have that information.
About
Right,
21.
but still, the 6 months is
Yes,
still,
about
you know,
21.
that sort of
Sir?
6-month obligation still seems just like a, you know,
I just said about
overkill.
21.
About-
If those are accurate.
that are simple possession charges, because you have mentioned possession with intent to distribute and possession.
Yes, but not
which is-
distribution.
Right.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yes,
it.
ma'am.
Chief, question for you. There's,
Yes, sir.
as you know, there's 2 versions of the resolution that are before council tonight. They're largely identical, and I think both properly focus on the need to change state law and change state sentencing guidelines, et cetera, which is really, as you say, that's really where the attention should be. But they do differ somewhat in terms of the kind of statement we make about local enforcement. And one version essentially says that we believe it should be a low priority, and so does the police department, because they're not currently treating it as a terribly high priority. And I'm paraphrasing the language. And does that language give you any heartburn? I mean,
I don't think there's anything about the resolution that, excuse me, that handcuffs law enforcement in doing our job and carrying out our lawful duties and responsibilities. The message that is sent is really of what's most concerned to me, and I spoke to that particularly with our young people. I don't want to ever send the message that this is okay. Mm-hmm. It's not that big of a deal. It's just marijuana, because I think that has adverse consequences with respect to kids. Having said that, and again, I don't know that the numbers are necessarily a conscious deprioritization of possession of marijuana arrests. It just happens to be our energy is focused on much more serious things, particularly violent crime in our community. That's how we deploy our resources.
Any other questions for the staff?
I have no more questions. I have
So we're
comments,
gonna
but
have
no
public
questions.
hearing, so you have to wait till after the meeting, okay? Any questions?
Any discussion?
Okay. Let's
you,
move
Mr.
to
Mayor.
discussion.
Thank you.
And comments by the city council members? Who would like to start?
I don't have a whole lot to say, I guess. I actually am generally supportive of decriminalization, not because I support use of marijuana or because I don't think it's addictive, because I think in some people it's addictive and in some people it's not. Just like alcohol, some people can recreationally drink alcohol and some people can't. And cigarettes as well, although I can't imagine not becoming addicted to cigarettes. But I think that decriminalization has more to do with regulation and with control than it does with saying it's okay. But I do have a little concern about this resolution. So the last paragraph of it I don't have any problem with, which is asking the state to revisit that at a state level. My concern is that absent decriminalization, we don't have control. We don't have ways of, sort of regulating and checking for quality and all of the things that you have when you have legalization. And so, I came in here today, and I'm still kind of here, a proponent, or at least an advocate for decriminalization, but I'm not sure that the local level resolution absent decriminalization really gets at what I want, which is a continued, keeping people from using marijuana for the most part. I think that, if people choose to get drunk on a weekend, that's their business. But I don't drink, and I don't really think it's a healthy thing to do. I don't think that society should be saying, hey, it's just alcohol. It's just, go ahead and drink, and then if you drive, well, yeah, you could kill somebody. But so I guess that I'm really torn on this, because I think that I worry that with too much of the sort of like wink wink and we're not really going to enforce it, we end up with a possibility for more racial disparity. I think we end up with people kind of who are in more public settings ending up caught more, probably students caught less. So I really wanted to go first so that the rest of you can kind of give it your best shot, and I'll listen from now on.
And I hope you bear with me, because this has been a cause of some heartburn and sleepless nights as well. I For the record, I am the mother of 2 sons, one who's 20, almost to be 21, and one who's 16. So I'm very aware of what our children are seeing and facing day to day. So I'm looking at what the charge is at hand, which is discussing this resolution about deprioritizing marijuana. So when I look at that, I look at the resolution language, and I find, quite honestly, a lot of the claims misleading. And I'm going to be going down point by point. There's the whereas that Virginia made 19,000 related arrests in 2009, and that the taxpayers are burdened annually, and that the cost of the resultant prosecutions, supervisions, and incarcerations are a real burden. And however, we've just heard that in Charlottesville, only 2.2% of local charges in Charlottesville are related to marijuana possession. So that's the 115 out of 5,000. That's 2.2%. So this is, in fact, in practice, subordinate to other criminal charges. The possession of marijuana is typically then dealt with by an issuance of a Virginia uniform summons as opposed to a custodial arrest. So again, it is not this burden that was projected in this resolution. Secondly, the resolution talks about how scientific and medical studies have repeatedly found that any effect marijuana has on users and those around them is significantly more benign than alcohol. It also says that adverse effects of marijuana are greatly overshadowed by the adverse effects of current Virginia marijuana laws and penalties. So those are pretty big statements to make that haven't been substantiated. And I look at what Dr. Peek has offered us by way of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the science of drug abuse and addiction, and it talks about that there is definite evidence that links marijuana use and schizophrenia. Again, I ask that there be respect shown in the chambers. It has also been shown, this is from Dr. Lillian Peek. She is our director of public health services. It increases heart rate, 4.8-fold increase in the risk of heart attack in the first hour of smoking. It contains 50 to 70% more carcinogenic hydrocarbons than tobacco smoke. That means that the lungs, when they're given to prolonged exposure, are more harmed by this use. A study of 450 individuals found that people who smoke pot have more health problems and miss more days of work than non-smokers. It relates to increased absences, tardiness, accidents, workers' compensation claims, and job turnover. We've also heard from Chief Longo that the evidence of decriminalization or legalizing marijuana may well have an impact on both mental and public health resources. So again, from a mental public health resource, there are serious concerns with this chemical. It is a chemical being ingested that affects the mind. And it affects young minds in particular. From the criminal justice perspective, I looked at Jeff Gould, the drug court administrator. The drug court clients and the National Association of Drug Courts is in opposition to decriminalization. Chief Longo has already stated that the Charlottesville Police Department has done exactly what this resolution is requesting, and by way of deprioritizing. It uses its funds for other higher priority crimes in the city. From our Commonwealth's attorney, Dave Chapman, he cites the February 2006 report, The Mental Health Risks of Adolescent Cannabis Use. It has adverse health effects on children. And so, and just recently there was an article in the Washington Post about the, I guess it's called fake pot, that is also an herb that is coated with THC, that is legal in D.C., and it has increased, its use has been increasing among young people very rapidly. And then again, from studies cited by Dr. Peek, the effect on the developing adolescent mind cannot be ignored. So I do have to think very seriously that when our district health director and our Commonwealth's attorney have clearly demonstrated via peer-reviewed studies that there are harmful mental and physical health effects on prolonged marijuana use on youth, this does directly refute several of the conditions laid out in the resolution. Our police chief and our Commonwealth's attorney have demonstrated that marijuana use is already receiving secondary emphasis as a law enforcement priority. Again, this directly refutes a fundamental premise of this resolution. So what's the purpose of this resolution? Given that its fundamental premises seem flawed to me, its purpose can only be symbolic. That means the council is being used as a bully pulpit to promote a particular message to the community. And I can't help but ask, what is that message? That marijuana use is benign and that our laws, which are based on false premises, should be ignored? What does this say to our middle school and high schoolers? That marijuana use is benign and that our laws, which are based on false premises, should be ignored? What position will that put our police, teachers, principals, and yes, parents who are desperately trying to keep our youth motivated and focused on achievement so that they can find good careers and trades? What does that say to their prospective employers? So I honestly cannot think that this bully pulpit can be used to send such mixed messages to our children. So what should the message be to our children? Find out what you need to do as a career as an adult, what you love to do, develop your talents, learn, know the feeling of failure and success, go to college, become a skilled craftsman, run a business. So what should the council's job be? To facilitate those opportunities, to reduce that 18% unemployment between ages 18 to 30 of our population. When people feel that they have a reason for being and that they have a destiny, then there's no need to self-medicate. There's no need to get involved with something that you're going to regret that you got involved with later on. And again, the addiction rate among the 13, 14-year-olds, it's so much higher when the kids get involved with it. And this message that we could potentially be sending with this resolution is quite startling to me, to our youth. So I cannot support this resolution.
Actually, for many of the same reasons, I do support the resolution because I believe, it's ironic that we hear a lot of statistics about all of these people using marijuana when it's illegal. It's sort of found on every corner, on every street corner. It's in the black market. If it actually were legal and it was regulated, then we would have much more control. You could argue at least we would have much more control about how kids would have access to it. At this point, we don't. We have no control because it's on the black market. I have sympathies with what Ms. Roberts said, but it's because it's illegal that you've got people going in and out of the house. If it was legal, you wouldn't see that with the distribution of marijuana. And I think it's largely, I do believe that it's largely because it's legal that we're having a lot of these problems. Not that we won't not have them, because we do with alcohol and we do with tobacco. Those are also both addictive drugs, if you will. It's not that you get rid of all your problems, but you just have so much more control over how they're distributed. And so I think the resolution doesn't, obviously we don't have the power to decriminalize marijuana, but I think it does, send the message actually in support of those who can work to decriminalize marijuana, that we, along with, quite frankly, the majority of Americans, feel it's time. We have lost this war on drugs. We've lost it. And the longer we continue to pretend that we can fight it while it's illegal, the more money, the more deaths, the more worldwide, because every time somebody smokes that stuff, they're supporting the illegal marketing and black market in this drug. So I think we should legalize it, and I think we should send that message.
I wanted to read a quote. Political leaders and public figures should have the courage to articulate publicly what many of them acknowledge privately, that the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that repressive strategies will not solve the drug problem, and that the war on drugs has not and cannot be won. Instead of punishing users who do no harm to others, governments should end criminalization of drug use, experiment with legal models that would undermine organized crime syndicates, and offer health and treatment services for drug users in need. We need drug policies based on methods empirically proven to reduce crime, lead to better health, and promote economic and social development. Now, people have said, some of the opponents of this resolution have tried to malign it by dragging some individuals' past history through the mud as a way of discrediting this message. But let me tell you who issued that quote that I just read. It was former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz, who served Ronald Reagan in the White House, former U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, the former presidents of Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, United Kingdom business mogul Richard Branson, and the current Prime Minister of Greece. All right, this isn't a bunch of potheads sitting around a table coming up with some radical language. This was a 19-member commission. It was called the Global Commission on Drug Policy, which I think pointed out what a lot of, pointed out or communicated a perspective which now it seems the majority of Americans support, which is that we have been headed the wrong direction when it comes to drug policy, and actually treating it the way that we do is actually making the problem worse. And I don't think any of us up here are champions for marijuana. Let me just say that I've never once partaken, and I never intend to partake in it. But I don't. Let me tell you a little story. All right. A number of years ago, my uncle was dying of cancer. His body was riddled with tumors, and in his last weeks, he could not find comfort from any of the medications that he had available to him. And he asked my grandmother, his mother, if she could find somebody that could get him some marijuana to help him deal with the pain that he was suffering. And she was a little worried, obviously, about trying to score some dope for her dying son, because she didn't want to end up going to jail. But she did it for him, and thank God that he did have access to one drug in the last days of his life that did help him relieve his pain. And I'm just wondering, how many of the folks in this room, I mean, what do you think the appropriate punishment should have been, particularly for those who feel like we're on the right track in terms of how we deal with drugs? What would be the appropriate punishment for my grandmother and my uncle? I mean, should they have... I mean, is that a 10-year? It's a rhetorical question. Is it a 10-year jail sentence? Is it a 5-year? Is it a fine? I mean, what's the appropriate punishment? It's all right. Maybe I shouldn't have opened up. But my point is that, in my opinion, the appropriate punishment was no punishment. And yet, the society that we're in right now, even though 80% of Americans think that marijuana should be legalized for medicinal purposes, and now 50% should believe it should be legalized in general, we still treat it as an offense which can ruin people's lives. And I think one of the speakers earlier made a very important distinction, and I think it was the woman in green, and I'm blanking on your name right now, but when you said that we have to distinguish between dangerous drugs and non-dangerous drugs. The fact is that marijuana, again, I don't encourage people to use it, but the fact is that it's a much less dangerous drug than alcohol. And in my opinion, sometimes we have to take sort of the 30,000-foot view and think just objectively. just think objectively. If we had the opportunity to start from scratch and come up with a drug policy that was consistent and that really did achieve the objective of regulating the dangerous drugs or outlawing the dangerous drugs and regulating the less dangerous drugs, I think we'd come up with a much more sensible policy when it comes to marijuana. This resolution, either versions of this resolution, do not make marijuana legal in the city of Charlottesville. And I want to be very clear about that. And we're not being asked to make marijuana legal in the city of Charlottesville. We're being asked to make a statement about whether or not arresting people or prosecuting people or persecuting people for small-scale personal use of marijuana should be a priority, and it's clearly not a priority as it is now, and I have no problem with us going on record as in support of that notion, that there are much higher priorities. Just last week, the President of the United States, Mr. Barack Obama, said these words: "I can't nullify congressional law. I can't ask," and this has to do with medicinal marijuana, "I can't ask the Justice Department to say, ignore completely a federal law that's on the books. What I can say is, use your prosecutorial discretion and properly prioritize your resources to go after things that are really doing folks damage. As a consequence, there haven't been prosecutions of users of marijuana for medical purposes." That's essentially what this resolution is asking us to do. It's the very same notion, that to properly prioritize our resources. I think the focus really needs to be, our primary focus needs to be on changing the law. But in the meantime, I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to say, as an elected body, that there are higher priorities, and that and that we're on the wrong direction when it comes to the war on drugs. And so I'll leave it at that.
We are considering tonight, as Councilman Norris said, marijuana enforcement priority, and not whether it is legal or not illegal. This resolution deals with the priority issue for our police department. We have received a great deal of information in the last few weeks. Many experts on both sides, and I appreciate that information. I have read everything I have gotten so far. I would focus on at least 3 experts on this issue, which are local experts, which police department, Commonwealth Attorney, and our health department. I think you already heard what Chief Longo has said, that those charged with possession of marijuana are at medium to high risk for re-offending, are at higher risk for being convicted of other charges, have a lower probation success rate. It is his viewpoint. Commonwealth Attorney also has said, especially for youth, marijuana in early years can result in substance addiction, life problems, as well as criminal behaviors. Our health department, Kathy just mentioned and pointed out that some long-term use can result into addiction, especially for youth. It is associated with anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia. High doses can produce acute psychosis. Marijuana smoke contains carcinogens 50 to 70% more than tobacco. It has increased the heart rate and heart attack problems. These are 3 viewpoints, at least local viewpoints, which I think one ought not to ignore. More importantly, what kind of message you're trying to send to our citizens, to our children? Not just the facts that marijuana is harmful, but also, is it the fact you're trying to convey to them is it is okay to smoke marijuana? Is that the message you're trying to convey by this kind of resolution? It seems to me that's what you're implying. Are you trying to say enforce and follow only the laws which you like and disregard the others? I think that's what you're trying to say in my mind. I think it is a passing of such a resolution showing our priority will detract from the community health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. That's why I plan to vote against it. We all have some chance. If you'd like to speak more, I'll be happy to hear from you.
I would like to say that I feel like we have 3 counselors who support the final paragraph of this, asking the state General Assembly and the governor to revisit the sentencing guidelines that merit jail terms for simple possession, do away with rules that support pose to intent to distribute without evidence, and give due consideration to sponsored state bills that would decriminalize, legalize, or regulate marijuana like alcohol. And I would be comfortable with a resolution that was that. I'm also intrigued by Mr. Fogel's proposal. I don't think that it's something we've had given any due diligence to and could vote on tonight, but would think that that might be something that I would want to at least look at. I've just kind of glanced through it to see if that's something that I would be more comfortable with. But I really do feel that in the absence of decriminalization, that especially the whereases I have a problem with, but even the first paragraph of the now therefore let it be resolved, that as long as it does continue to be illegal and the only way to get it is from drug dealers and there is no control or way of regulating its quality or any of the things that we would have if we did have decriminalization, I'm not prepared to vote yes on that part tonight.
Other comments or questions?
I'd just like to read a paragraph, maybe 2, from a letter we got today from someone. I thought it was such a good letter, and I'm going to start in the middle, but she writes, as a single mother and a business owner who has worked in the field of education for over 35 years, I fully support this resolution. When it comes to the message that passing this resolution could send our children, I think it is more important to focus on what are we teaching our children by continuing to participate in a failed war against drugs, because the statistics show that we are also failing to keep them off drugs. It is important to impart to our youth there are many times in life when maturity and a sense of responsibility should be acquired before engaging in certain activities. Driving, voting, serving in the military, and the use of alcohol and tobacco are just a few examples. And she goes on to talk about truthful conversations with our children so that they can make the best possible choices for their futures. And, I think it's a really good point. It goes on, it's a lovely piece, really about this issue being just one of many issues as we raise our children that we need to be talking to them about. And
I found that letter also very compelling. I think those are very good arguments.
Is there a motion on the floor? Anybody would like to make a motion?
Could you repeat the motion? Kristen, was yours?
Well, I would support a motion that we just do the final paragraph. I don't know, do you need whereases for a resolution? I don't think you do. I mean, if we feel that that decriminalization is something that we can agree is something that we would like the General Assembly to support or to revisit, that part I feel very comfortable with. Because I think it would take marijuana use out of the criminal field and put it in more of a public health field, and I think that that's appropriate. But
what kind of message are you sending to the children that it is okay to use marijuana?
Not at all.
I'm wondering if you're suggesting that we should make alcohol illegal because keeping it legal sends the message that we're telling children to drink alcohol.
We are talking about
We tried that already
marijuana
once,
today.
didn't we?
That's my point. We tried it once. It was a miserable failure.
And I think that the people who wanted it to be made illegal were concerned about the fact that, people were drinking and abandoning their children, people were drinking and getting involved in fights, that it was very bad for them. And it's true, it is. And I think that the fact that it was criminalized did not help, which is why I'm for decriminalization.
So I appreciate your willingness to support that last paragraph, because I think at the end of the day that's really the most important, practically speaking, the most important piece of the resolution. I do want to put in one more plug, if nothing else, at least to honor and recognize the fact that, recognize and honor what we've already heard from our police department, which is it's, enforcement of the marijuana laws is actually not currently a high priority for the Charlottesville Police Department. And, there was some alternative language suggested as a second part of the resolution that essentially just says we support the current policy. We don't believe it should be a high law enforcement priority in the city.
And I don't see any reason to do a resolution saying, we could do resolutions supporting all the laws we approve of or the practices that we approve of, and I don't think we do that.
I could live with that. You don't want all those whereases, and then just take that one.
Because I agree with Councilor Galvin. Some of the whereases are problematic, and I think that you don't really need these particular whereases to support that final paragraph. If we wanted to put in new whereases, then we could, but I don't know that we need to.
So is there
May I
motion on
ask
the
a
floor?
question of Mr. Von Hemert?
Sure.
Do you mind if, since this is becoming a situation, and we've talked about this before with regards to the legislative liaison with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, and how David Blount in that capacity serves as the person that would look at this, gather information from the members of the commission region, and they form their issues. It's just a package, a legislative package, a request to look into. It's not a resolution that is projecting a symbolic message. It is just a package to look into more research about this issue or that issue. Is that something that would be possible from your perspective as the community criminal justice planner?
Can I just ask for a clarification that most of that legislative packet is made up from resolutions that we do? That's where they come from.
Well, maybe, but it's interesting that that's not how it's been presented to me, so that's news to me, so that's interesting. Because then, if this was simply a question of doing research where we did look at the implications of mental health and the implications upon youth behaviors, where we did look seriously at other communities and countries, including other states that are now backpedaling on a lot of their legislation, amending their decriminalization laws, if we could do research that looked seriously at all of the ramifications, I would be in support of a request to have further research done at the legislative level. But I cannot support a resolution that is already come to the conclusion that this is what we must do.
So the wording, I'm sorry, you go ahead and answer, then I'll jump in.
Sure. I have to compliment the city of Charlottesville and the county of Albemarle. You're one of 7 national sites that received an award for being your criminal justice system based on evidence. And we're the only locality east of the Mississippi that received that award. And the reason why we got that award was based on doing the work on all perspectives, both from the criminal justice system, from the mental health systems, from substance abuse. And when you're talking about marijuana, there's a whole component of that you're looking at. I mean, you can look at municipal use, and I absolutely support that. My wife works as a hospice social worker, and so I understand the need for pain medication for that, and that's an absolute priority that's needed in that factor. There's also the factors that you're dealing with, the drug wards, on a national basis, which we're not talking about in this resolution. So yes, my suggestion would be to take follow up with your history that you've done, whether when you developed a drug court or when you developed a CIT project, that you took almost a year on either one of those on just doing the research and the evidence before you made that decision. So I would follow that same guideline that has gotten you that national status already of doing the research, from looking on how it affects from all different perspectives, because whether you're talking about municipal use, which has a completely different THC level compared to what might be out on the street, that compared to somebody that grows it for their own use, those are completely different animals in the system. So you're absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount of research that needs to be done when you're looking at that, whether you're looking at it at a global level or looking at it just what's happening here in Charlottesville. And you can add all those different perspectives, whether it's the racial issues or the issues on that you brought up about folks or inmates that are in jail based on race. So we can take a look at that information if you'd like to, and we can provide more detailed analysis for you. But again, with the history that we had, it took us a year before we developed those national recognized programs that we have today. So I'll take your lead on how you would like us to follow.
One of the things that I appreciated about the language of this last paragraph is that it doesn't say that we demand that the Virginia General Assembly and the Governor of Virginia decriminalize marijuana. It says that we ask that they revisit sentencing guidelines, do away with rules that suppose intent without evidence, give due consideration to sponsored state bills that would decriminalize, legal, or regulate. So it's really exactly what you're calling for, it sounds like.
Well,
at a state level.
On a state level. And so you have to take it all at all different levels, and because you can't just put it into one component.
But I'm not sure that we need to do all of that research before we ask the state to do that research. I think that you're right. Before we considered Mr. Fogel's or this other stuff, that there's more information that we need.
You're exactly right. I mean, you've come full circle here, is that it's a federal and a state mandate, and it has absolutely no bearing on any municipality or locality. So it really comes down to perception of what you want to have your locality look at. And so and that goes in both directions. You're absolutely right. So you need to look at both sides. I agree.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that the City Council call on the Virginia General Assembly and the Governor of Virginia to revisit the sentencing guidelines that merit jail terms for simple possession, do away with rules that suppose intent to distribute without evidence, and give due consideration to sponsored state bills that would decriminalize, legalize, or regulate marijuana like alcohol.
I'd second that.
Is there discussion?
Discussion.
I would just like to point out that you actually made a very good point, which is where I think regulation would be really critically important, and that is that we're not, this marijuana over here isn't the same as this marijuana over here. It isn't the same as this marijuana over here in terms of THC, and that is where legalization would be incredibly helpful, I think.
More discussion on the motion?
I would still want to insist that we qualify that and make it absolutely clear that we are not condoning, sanctioning, telegraphing in any way that marijuana use is not harmless. And I cannot even make this statement or agree to this statement without without some qualifier. And at the same time, I'm beginning to feel like this isn't a local ordinance. We are been spending a lot of time talking about state and federal law. If this is something that the state would already be looking at, researching, we would benefit from and contribute to, fine, as long as it's not additional staff time on our part. This is not something we should be spending local time doing. So what I'm as we're noodling around with this and we're trying to tweak it so that more of us could agree to it, I'm seeing that it's going to wind up taking a lot more time. And
how about if it said Let it be resolved that while use of any quantity of marijuana for whatever purpose is and will continue to be illegal in the city of Charlottesville, the City Council calls on the Virginia General Assembly, etc., to add that preamble.
I am not in a position where I can even say that we would do away with rules of any kind. I'm in agreement, and I've always been, the very first statement when this issue came up would be to look at the sentencing guidelines for jail terms for simple possession. That was the one thing that I had always said I would be interested in looking at.
Which is what this is, that we need a little more time on.
Yeah, we need more time on that. And then but what instead we've been getting is this, what quite frankly feels like a polemic to me.
Well, let me...
So I think maybe this is just not going to work tonight.
We do have a motion, and if you can agree on it, fine. If not, maybe we can follow up on Mr. Fogel's suggestion, which he gave to us.
May I offer a friendly amendment?
Yes, ma'am.
That we add that at the beginning? Because it was...
But that does exactly what you said a few minutes ago you didn't want to do, which is this restate existing policy. I mean, I think just leaving it clean and simple, as you initially suggested.
Okay.
Because it doesn't sound like it's going to win us.
Would you vote against it no matter what?
I think
even if that were added?
I need more time to look at Mr. Fogel's. I am concerned about the way we do our sentencing and jail time. Yes, but this has gotten all too wrapped up with too many other messages.
This is basically adding to our legislative agenda, which is something that we do about a lot of things.
I would not be willing to agree today, at least.
Okay. We have a motion and we have a second.
Yes. Any more discussion on the motion? If not, please vote. Motion passes. 3-2. Okay, we have another opportunity for public to speak. Please come forward, identify your name, and have 3 minutes to speak. No?
My name is Paul Long. I live at 1410 Grady Avenue, and I should have left a little bit a while ago. I'm tired. But I wanted to stay and address the issue that was talked about, the resolution as far as marijuana. And as Ms. Gavin said, this indeed should be a bully pulpit for discussion on how we deal with people who have drug addiction problems. I think the discussion should encompass all drug abuse, whether it's marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, alcohol, whatever. And Mayor Huger mentioned what kind of message are we sending our children. I've called for the decriminalization of all drug use. And I think that the message that I'm calling for is that there's nothing, people have different coping mechanisms. And some people, as they go through life, one of their coping mechanisms is to abuse drugs. There's a variety of reasons why they do that, and we can read a lot of literature that tries to explain that. But I think what society needs to tell people is that if you are suffering from a drug addiction to whatever drug, it's nothing to be ashamed of. In the same sense that if you have cancer, if you have high blood pressure or diabetes, you wouldn't be ashamed to go seek medical attention for that. I want to make a distinction between calling for decriminalization and legalization, because when I ran for city council and was calling for decriminalization, there's a difference. I'm not saying legalize it. It's not like you can go down to your local grocery store and buy marijuana or crack cocaine or whatever. What I'm saying is that if a person gets stopped merely with possession of drugs in their pocket for any reason whatsoever, they're not going to go to jail for that, and they're not going to go to prison for that. A lot of lives have been destroyed by drug use. I think that there is recovery. I wish that Chris Winters was still here, because he's done a lot of good in the community as far as reaching out to addicts who are seeking help. But we have to look differently at it, at the whole problem. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And as been noted by Mr. Fogel and many other people, the war on drugs in the last 40 years has been a colossal failure. When I was a small child, I remember watching The Untouchables on television, which was about Elliot Ness during the time when alcohol was outlawed. That didn't stop alcohol abuse. The last 40 years, throwing people in prison and jail doesn't keep them from using drugs. I have a good friend of mine who's been incarcerated many times. He's not afraid of prison and he's not afraid of jail. He needs treatment, not imprisonment and not jail time. We have to look at it that way, and we have to use the local level. As I realize City Council has no control of that. These decisions are being made in Richmond and the Capitol in Washington, D.C., but the voices for reform and change have to come from the local issue. I never thought that I would agree with Gary Wills and Pat Robinson, both of whom were on the conservative side, and if they knew who I was, probably wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. But they have both called for decriminalizing drug use. The late William F. Buckley did the same thing. And a former mayor of Baltimore, I don't know whether he's alive or not, Carl Schultz, who before becoming mayor of Baltimore was a federal prosecutor back in the 70s and 80s, was calling for the same thing. The support for decriminalizing crosses ideological barriers, crosses political parties. It's time to decriminalize drug use and look upon it as a public health issue, which is what it is. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
How you doing, Council, Mayor? My name is Matthew Fogg, and I am retired Chief Deputy United States Marshal with 32 years of service. Here speaking on behalf of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We're about 60,000 supporters around the country, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, police officers, former and current police officers. The reason why I'm here testifying is because, of course, you passed the law deprioritizing marijuana. But I'd like to look at the bigger picture. Myself, I was led a drug enforcement task force for several years, Metropolitan Area Task Force. We did drug interdiction all over the country. And one of the biggest things that we've come to the conclusion as law enforcement officers, we've come to the reality that, of course, the war on drugs hasn't had no impact other than the fact that the dangerous fallout that it has created. Just like alcohol prohibition, we came to the realization that as long as you make it illegal, it's going to create a black market. That's been said up here. So I don't want to go over that with you, but one of the things about the race issue that was brought up here, I remember coming out of the academy and then joining and being assigned to the Drug Enforcement Task Force as a supervisory special agent in charge. I was cross-designated. And during this time, I remember one of the first things was told to me when we started setting our drug and gun and addiction task forces up around the country, Chicago, New York, Miami. We would do these dragnets so that we could convince the public that we were doing our job. We'd go in and lock up as many folks as we can, everything moving. But the racial part came out because I noticed when we were doing our task forces, all of these inner cities we were targeting, we were mainly targeting inner city urban youth. So I asked a question one day to a special agent in charge. I said, listen, don't they use drugs out in Potomac, some of the more affluent areas of America? And I'm sure you guys understand they do use drugs there. Matter of fact, according to the crime control statistics, they use them more in the affluent areas. They're more accessible. But the problem was, you know what he told me? He says, Fogg, you know what? He said, listen, if we go out there and start locking those folks up, because we know where they are, we can target them, we can go get them. He said, but if we go start locking those folks up, he said, you know what's going to happen? He says, we're going to get that phone call. He says, because they know judges, they know lawyers, they know politicians. He says, and they're going to shut our operation down. And you know what's going to happen to us? He said, there goes your overtime. You see, what I've learned in law enforcement is this. I can stop a car with 4 whites in the car, and I can stop a car with 4 blacks in the car. I know whatever I say those blacks did, that system behind me is going to back me up. I know when I say what those white folks did, somebody might say to me, well, what was your probable cause? What was your reason? I may get scrutinized. We all on the job. Everybody knows that. The supervisor, you know what he told me? He says, man, just go to the weakest link. We're all making money. We're doing well. Let's do that. And then I begin to see there was a culture in place. So what I'm saying is when we look at these disparities, we already know the disparities. These horrible disparities exist because of the culture that's in place, because everyone wants to build their system. So what I'm just letting you know, I just wanted to say to you that until we address the culture, until we address it, I would say, yes, decriminalize it. I would say make it, because the bottom line, it is a serious disparity, and that's the reason why we see these numbers that Cheryl Alexander, and I'm closing, Cheryl Alexander's book said in the new Jim Crow, there are more today African Americans in the criminal justice system, either on parole, probation, or doing time than there were slaves at the time of the Civil War. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm just going to be really brief. My name's Lennis Worth, and I'm the director of an organization, Virginians Against Drug Violence, and I was part of the group of people that were bringing this marijuana issue before you today. And I want to thank you for your vote in favor of it. And I also just wanted to say one thing to kind of calm the fears of people who had concerns. I've been the mother of teenagers, and I can just tell you one thing. You can say no, and you can wag your finger at them. That is exactly the opposite of what would be effective. You know, we've all heard the story of Pandora's box and the apple in the middle of the Garden of Eden. This outcome is always the same. The more you say no and the more you admonish, the more a teenager at that rebellious time in his life is going to want to be curious and going to want to experiment with it. Best thing for you to do is to give honest, accurate, and neutral information. And this way you can prepare your children the best for dealing with the issues of drug abuse. The fact that marijuana is out there in such proliferation, there's a lot of reasons for it. In my personal opinion, the number one reason is because it has medical value. It's a popular folk medicine. And the fact that you've got police chasing people with it all the time is very destructive to the community. And it's not destructive to just be factual with teenagers. This is the best thing to do. And to use this kind of, well, we're after you, we're chasing you, we're going to arrest you, that's actually something that causes a lot of teen drug abuse. And I want to thank the members here. You've been very courageous this evening. And thanks for listening to all the testimony. Have a good night.
Hi, I'm Ed McCann. I'm the director of Virginia Normal. We were one of the proponents of the marijuana resolution that I want to thank you for supporting, at least part of it. In fact, I think that's probably the most important part because as localities, you don't have much discretion for criminal laws. And the state needs to hear this message from the localities. One thing the state also needs to hear, and other officials in Virginia, and that is the truth, because they are spreading misinformation. One delegate in the Capitol last year said to the effect that nobody goes to jail for marijuana possession. A few weeks ago, in response to Pat Robertson, the Commonwealth Attorney of Virginia Beach said that nobody in the country goes to jail for simple marijuana possession. Yet we find the direct evidence contradicting those views. These are our elected officials actually giving misinformation regarding the issue, and we're doing the research to clarify that. We think that the resolution was a good first step in our effort to make more appropriate marijuana laws. It will allow the city to transition to more drug prevention and treatment and away from enforcement as tools to deal with drug abuse. The message that it sends to young people, this is the key message. And we don't send the message to young people that alcohol is great and we should all booze it up by maintaining it as a legal substance. And we don't do that by carding young folks when they buy cigarettes. We don't send that message. We don't want to. We, the marijuana reformers, do not want children to use marijuana because we understand the effects of it better than anyone else. It is a risky substance, and you must be mature to make the decision to use risky substances, in our view. I want to throw out some numbers just so we can get a handle on the local use rates. If we're talking about generally most places in Virginia mirror national statistics. About 36,000 adults in Charlottesville. About 16,000 of them have used marijuana. 16,000 of them have committed the crime in their lifetime, 44%. Approximately 4,000 adults this year, or 11%, will use it. 2,400, or 6% of adults, are using it this month. The law is not preventing these people from using it, and it instead only furthers the harm inflicted upon them. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for the folks who came up and spoke to their addictions. I would not want an addiction on anybody, be it for alcohol, tobacco, or in my case, chocolate. I wander out at 11 o'clock at night to get chocolate, and whether that's disturbing or not, I don't know. But I don't think the criminal law is an appropriate method to deal with that issue.
Your time is up, please.
I'm sorry. And as has been stated, half of us here in this city, at least, probably more from our demographics, want marijuana to be legal in an open market where children can be ID'd and people and the whole system can be regulated, unlike what it is now. I wanted to bring up, as on a humorous note, I looked through the criminal code, found a law that I don't think is being enforced one bit, and that's the law 18.2-345, lewd and lascivious cohabitation. This is a Class 6 felony. This is the easiest thing in the world to determine from a police standpoint. You ask if the domestic call, if the participants are married, and if they're living together. If not, they get a felony charge. This is not enforced. We think that some crimes are just not worthy of being enforced, and marijuana possession is one of them. We are responsible cannabis users, and we thank you for passing the resolution.
Thank you.